couldn't. I love the night. That's the only time I feel really alive.
That's what David wanted.
Blood, I was to find, was a necessity as well.
A vampire in love with a slayer. It's rather poetic. I am the monster the breathing men would kill. I am Dracula.
Good evening, my fellow vampire lovers. The sun is going down, and you know what that means. It is time for me to record another episode of my podcast, The Beautiful Dead. As always, I'm your host, Lena. It's 2025. Can you believe it? Happy New Year's to all of you. I hope you have lots of plans, resolutions. Tell me in the comments below what your resolutions are, and I will help keep you accountable. I read somewhere that the second Friday of January is the most common day for people to give up on their New Year's resolutions. It's actually called Quitter's Day. So check in with me in a couple weeks and tell me that you're still following your resolutions. Put it in the comments so that we can all keep you accountable. I did not have a chance to do my tarot. I will order it and then I will bring it to you next week. I know it's a little bit late, but I will come back to you next week with my tarot for January. I'm excited to see what 2025 is going to hold for me. Of course, you all know that my big hope is that I sell this screenplay and you get to see the Eternal Night Shift series turned into a show. Wouldn't that be amazing? I'm also very busy preparing for MegaCon in February. I can't believe it's a month away. This is a huge opportunity, a 4-day con, which I've never done before. And I will be doing a brand new vampire panel. But if you stay till the end of this episode, I'm going to show you a snippet of my panel from last year, I think it was, or the year before in Philly. And of course, I will be back at Philly. That's May of 2025. Go follow me on Instagram, The Beautiful Dead Podcast. It really is like the quickest way for you to know what I'm up to. Or you can go to lenanazeri.com and join my Fanged family. They actually get an email as soon as I say yes to an appearance. And they get to see book covers before anyone else. And yes, I am working on the 5th book, Alex. I'm excited for this one. People are pretty excited for it. It's a little different than what I normally do. So if you're starting to get a little bit bored with my books, check out Alex, because this one's going to be kind of different. So, all right. What are we talking about today? Spoiler alerts, if you've never watched this channel before, you've never listened to the podcast, I'm gonna ruin everything for you because we're breaking down the universe. I can't do that without ruining like who's gonna sleep with who gets turned, who gets killed, all that stuff. So spoiler alert. But we are talking about the Radleys, and this is based on a book by Matt Haig, who's a horror author. I don't know if I've read anything else of his. I will look into it after I'm done recording, and if I have, I will post it here on the video. But I do know he's a horror author. And I was turned on to this one because somebody had mentioned to me like 3 months ago, and I threw it on my wish or watch list. And so I was like, all right, let's go start cleaning up this watch list of mine because it gets very long, very fast. And you guys are always so good at giving me ideas, and so the list is ever growing. So don't worry, this podcast is not going anywhere because the vampire stuff just it comes out faster than I can possibly review it. So if you haven't seen the new Nosferatu, go check out my episode last week. And you get to hear what I thought about it. I highly recommend you watch the movie before you have it ruined for you. But if you just want to hear me talk about it, you can go check it out. That's what I uploaded last week as a surprise start to this season. So that's pretty exciting. All right, let's go ahead and summarize the Radleys. And thank you to whoever wrote this summary on Wikipedia because it does help me out so much to just sort of concisely talk about the movie before we break it down, especially if you haven't seen it and you don't care to see it, or if you've seen it but you just need your memory jogged. Peter and Helen are getting ready for Peter's birthday with the neighbors. Their teen children, Clara and Rowan, leave the party to hang out in a field with their friends instead. When Clara leaves the party, she's followed into the woods by Stuart, who attempts to force himself on the girl. She punches him, fangs descend, and she attacks Stuart, bleeding him dry. She calls her parents from the woods, who come to help her drag Stuart's body back to the house and hide it in their car's trunk. That night, Peter and Helen explain to their children that they are all vampires. When Clara recently chose to go vegan and stopped taking in animal products, it made her thirst uncontrolled. They explain to the children that they are abstainers, vampires who choose to not drink blood. They also reveal that there are support organizations for both active and abstaining vampires. After the children have gone to bed, Peter calls his brother Will and asks for his help. Meanwhile, the neighbor's son Evan is shopping with Clara, who is now glowing from the recent blood drinking. Evan laughs when he tells Clara that his father, Jared, is a retired police officer who is now obsessed with vampires, believing that they are all around him. Will arrives and we see that he is Peter's identical twin. It's explained that Will is an active vampire still drinking blood, which means he has all of his vampiric powers. Helen and Peter ask Will to dispose of Stuart's body to protect Clara, and Will does. When two officers show up at their house to interrogate Clara, since she's the last person who was seen with the missing Stuart, Will uses his power to mind control the officers into believing there is no reason to suspect Clara. Will takes Rowan out to a nightclub to show him what it's like to live as an active vampire. Clara and Evan are getting closer. Jared searches for the missing Stuart and finds Clara's fingerprints at the crime scene, but thanks to mind control, the police don't believe that Clara is a real suspect. Will uses his mind control to enter Helen's thoughts while she's in the bath, seducing her. Meanwhile, Peter gives in to temptation and drinks the blood samples he's drawn from one of his patients, and Rowan drinks several of Will's blood bottles. Rowan reads up on vampires and calls one of the vampire organizations to learn about his kind. He's taught that if a vampire gives their blood to a human that they've killed, they can turn them into a vampire. But the vampire that they've made will crave their maker for eternity. This is when we find out that Will turned Helen, which is why she can't stop wanting him. Peter finds empty blood bottles under Rowan's bed, and Rowan finds Peter trying to drink the last drop. Peter confronts Will, blaming him for the disintegration of his family's control. Next door, Evan finds the materials from his dad's investigation of the Radleys and confronts his dad. Jared tells his son that he believes the Radleys are vampires and that Clara killed Stuart. Both right. Evan believes his dad has gone mad over his wife leaving him, and Jared breaks down and apologizes to his son for his crazy behavior. At school, Rowan has been given the confidence thanks to the blood drinking and admits to his crush to Evan himself, asking the boy out on a date, which Evan accepts. Rowan drinks blood and takes Evan out on their big date in an arcade, but when he almost loses control and bites Evan, he runs from the arcade to find his Uncle Will for advice. Helen and Peter confront each other with secrets. Peter thought he had converted Helen, and she was only with him because of the bond, but she admits that his brother Will was actually the one that turned her. She let Peter pretend to convert her the next day so he wouldn't know. She admits that she's been craving Will this whole time and uses hobbies and the children to distract her. After all these years, her craving for Will is overwhelming, but she truly does love Peter. Jared gets a text from Evan saying help, so he races from the house to find his son bleeding to death in the arcade bathroom. Rowan smells Evan's blood on his uncle and attacks him. They fight as Jared carries his dying son to the truck and speeds off. Clara finds her brother and uncle fighting and runs for help from Peter and Helen. Peter saves Rowan and the brothers begin to fight, but Helen stabs a signpost through Will and he dies. Jared calls the abstainers hotline for assistance with his son, and he is told to make a choice: vampire blood or death. Jared speeds to the Radleys, begging them for help. As he dies, Rowan bites his wrist and shares his blood with Evan, who opens his eyes and is now a vampire. The movie ends with the family burning Will's body and discarding all evidence of him, then reflecting on what this means for all of their futures. Yeah. That is the Radleys. Let's go ahead and let's talk. There is one thing. There's no vampire crossovers. None of these people have ever been in vampire movies before. But there was one thing that was like a trivia piece that I wanted to bring up to you guys. So the field that they are all partying in is a field in front of Whitby Abbey. They're in Whitby. So that, of course, is from the novel Dracula. So I thought that was fun. So I wanted to mention that. But let's go ahead and break down the universe of the Radleys. Relationship to humans. We've seen this before. They live amongst humans. They go to school and work. Most humans have no idea that vampires exist. There's just a few, like Jared, who believes that vampires are real. But for the most part, humans would never even guess that vampires are real. Relationship to animals. The very first scene shows that the Radleys have a dog. So obviously, the dog has no problem with vampires. We never see animals react to the vampires. We never see the vampires control animals. So it sounds like a pretty standard relationship to animals. Appearances. They look human. There's really nothing to show you that they're vampires until their fangs come. And those are two sharp, retractable fangs.
Made him a pathetic slave to his appetite like you and...
It's mentioned many times how pale they are, and they are pale. However, this movie is in England. They're English, and we all know that's a naturally pale bunch. And no shade to the English, but you know, it's kind of hard to tell because most of the actors in this movie are pale. Blood. Okay, so the vampires, like I explained, they do have a lust for blood, but they don't have to drink it to survive. They just have to take in any kind of animal product. So as long as you're eating, you know, steak and chicken and stuff like that, then it kind of tampers that bloodlust. So there's two types of vampires. The ones who choose not to drink it are called the abstainers, and then the ones who do drink it are called active vampires. And the downside to not drinking the blood is that you lose your vampiric powers. So, food.
If they've only just told you what you are, well then I'd have been a bit tricky to explain before now.
You still do it.
They can eat and drink whatever they want. And the fact that Clara decides to be vegan and stops taking in any kind of animal product is how that bloodlust eventually does overtake her. Sunlight. So they can be in the sun. The first scene when we're introduced to the father, they make a point to focus on an SPF 50 bottle of sunblock. I don't know if that was meant to imply that the vampires have to wear sunblock to go outside, but listen, I wear SPF 50. If I'm going to be outside for a really long time and it's really hot, I'll put on SPF 50 because I'm not trying to age early. So it's really not that high. Like SPF 100 would have been a little more like, oh, okay, the vampires need to be protected. Sleep. They can sleep wherever they want because they're essentially humans that lust for blood. Holy items. This is never addressed, but I don't think they're going to have any issue with holy items because, again, this movie portrays them as essentially humans that just have this one extra component, which is that they, if they drink blood, then they have these extra powers. Rules. So there's not really rules. Like, you don't need invited in. You're not intolerant to garlic. Now, I will say when Will shows up, he says, you have to invite me in.
So you're going to invite me in then? I invite you into my home.
So that might be because he's drinking blood. Or maybe because there's a rift in the family. He's like, I'm not stepping in until you invite me in. I think the implication is that active vampires have to be invited in. But we never see anything else like that, so I don't know. They always cast reflections, so I don't know. Essentially, if you drink blood, you become more vampire than if you're not drinking blood. When you're abstaining, there are rules.
Why didn't they tell me?
Step 4. We undertake to sever contacts with all active vampires in our lives.
So if you're an abstainer, you're supposed to cut off all active vampires, which is why The brothers haven't spoken in such a long time. And the only reason that he caves and calls his brother is because he needs help saving his daughter, from being thrown in jail for murder. So that's the only reason he finally caves. So there's like a handbook, and there's like all these rules. We're going to talk more about this at the end, but there are rules, but it's not vampire rules. It's just rules of if you belong to this group. Powers. They are stronger than humans, and they have a very good sense of smell. The father, even when he's not drinking blood, has a very good sense of smell. And then, of course, once you start drinking blood, then you get more powers back. So if you're an active vampire, you can control minds like he did with the police.
I'm sorry, I can't do that. Clara Radley knows absolutely nothing about that boy. In fact, if this case comes up in future, you're going to find it highly amusing.
And you heal very quickly. Let's talk a little bit about how they're made. So in this world, there's two types of vampires. You can be born a vampire, like the children, and I think the twin brothers were born vampires. They age like humans, and then the bloodlust, I think, like kicks in teen years. It's kind of like puberty is the implication, and as long as you're eating animal products, you can kind of stave off that bloodlust. If it starts at birth, they never address that at all, but I don't know how that could be possible unless you give them cow's milk. But even then, I don't know. We don't know at what point or like how they age, if they age. No one says anything in this movie that makes, nobody says like, well, 100 years ago, vampires were better.
I was a high-minded when I was young. Now here we all are in middle age.
So the implication is that they age like humans, maybe slower, and they can heal themselves, but that unless they like hit 20, I don't know. And like the parents are clearly in their 40s, so the implication is that they age just like humans. Heartbeat or breathing. I don't know if I missed this being addressed, but I don't think it was. However, if these children didn't know they were vampires until they were in high school, I'm sure they've seen a doctor at some point. So obviously they have heartbeat and breathing, or else somebody would have keyed on to the fact that they're not human. So how do they die? We only see one vampire die in this, and that is Will, and he is staked through the heart and then has his body burned. So I have to think that that works to kill a vampire because he's killed by other vampires. They're not going to waste their time doing all that if it's not going to work. So stake through the heart and being burned is the only thing that we see. Oh, and I wanted to go back to how they're made. So we talked about the born vampires. The made vampires are drained to death and then given vampire blood, and then that's what brings them back. So a pretty classic embrace. The caveat is that if you're turned, you now crave your maker for as long as you live, which sucks.
He's invading my mind.
It's our secret, okay?
I enjoyed it.
All right, are they good or are they bad? Like so many of the universes we discuss, these vampires can choose. They can choose if they're going to be good, they're going to choose if they're going to be bad. They can abstain from blood and take in animal blood or animal products, or they can kill humans. It's completely up to them. Now, that being said, if you can mind control, then you could drink from a human and not drain them and just make them forget. We've seen that before. So you could be an active vampire without killing anybody, but it seems like Will has chosen to just do whatever he wants. So again, this goes back to the whole morality of what makes you good and what makes you bad, what makes you evil, what makes you whatever. This is not a morality podcast, it's a vampire podcast. All right, tropes I love and tropes I hate. Okay, so this one is not vampire specific, but I love when the same actor is playing twins. I love that. You really have to be a very, very, very good actor to completely play two different personalities, okay? You can change somebody's makeup and hair and clothes and it doesn't make them a whole second person. They really do have to become a whole second person. And you can tell if somebody is not good at acting or is just playing the same person in different clothes. Just saying. I also love this trope that, like, if you're turned, then you crave your maker. It really adds like a very complicated layer to the whole idea of embracing somebody, because then how do you know if they're with you for love or they're just addicted to you? I think that I love the idea of that. It really does kind of amp up the morality of turning somebody and add a very complicated layer to that relationship. Tropes I hate. I've said it before. I freaking hate when vampires can be in the sunlight. I really, really do. I'm also not a huge fan of a born vampire. I hate that idea. People ask me all the time, like, is your character in the book gonna get pregnant? No. I don't care if that spoils it for you. I'm telling you as the author, if you love my books, she's never getting pregnant. I hate that. Hate it. And I'm looking at you, Bella. Baby vampire is ridiculous. All right. Ratings. Woo. Okay. This was not as fun to rate as some of the other ones. How scary or evil are the vampires of the Radleys? So they are not bound by the sun, which gives them more access, but they can survive without blood. So they don't need to kill anybody. They have complete control over their morality, and they age, I think, like other creatures. However, if they're active vampires, they can mind control you, which makes it pretty easy for them to hide crimes, so you do have to give them that. They're strong, they have heightened senses, so it does make them very good hunters if they choose to be. But I don't think that they're any more scary or more evil than just like a human serial killer. So I kept thinking about it, and I just kind of felt so about these vampires. So I was like, fine, 5 out of 10 for scariness and evil, just kind of right in the middle. Like, I mean, I would be just as scared of a serial killer as I would of Will, you know. How sexy or alluring are the vampires of the Radleys? The vampires don't look any different or really act any different than humans. It's not like the vampire walks into the room and suddenly everybody is drawn to them and can't stay away. When we meet Will, he's very sexual, where his brother and sister-in-law aren't so much. So I think it's the blood that makes you horny, or it's just about like, Will has just decided he's going all in on the vampire lifestyle. He's going to completely embrace it. That's not just blood drinking, but sex as well. He's fluid with his sexuality. We see him with men and women. So I don't know that he's necessarily more horny, but all in all, they aren't really more sexy or alluring because they're vampires. Again, they just kind of felt mid.
You're mid, you're mid, you're mid. Oh!
So I'm gonna tie it. I'm gonna say when it comes to scariness and evil and sexy and alluring, they're a 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10 onks for sexiness and allure. The whole thing just felt very, it was very like, their suburban middle-class family lifestyle was just exactly what this whole movie felt like. It was just like, okay. Wasn't bad, wasn't good. My thoughts. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but the wind is whipping outside. When I'm done recording, I might need to go make sure I'm not like losing stuff out there. Anywho, all right, my thoughts. I say it all the time. I am looking for something that is different, and this was different. Okay, I will give them that. It is based on a book. I think I might have to add the book to my to be read list, just to kind of see an idea of the source material, like what did Matt have in mind, as opposed to what I saw on screen. I am intrigued enough to read the book. Personally, I don't think I'll watch this movie again. I didn't hate it, but I don't feel like I need to repeat it either. The vampires don't feel very thought out. It's more like the vampires were used so that they could treat the blood drinking like it was an addiction. You know, the hotline, the way they talk about blood, it feels very much like a recovery support group. And that's what I wanted to talk about with the rules, is like, as you're seeing the handbook, as you're seeing the website, as you're listening to the hotline, like this feels so much like AA or NA. Like it's almost like they were using the bloodlust as like a metaphor for addiction. I don't know if that's what the author intended, but that's what the movie felt like to me. Not a huge fan of the born vampire trope or the vampire family trope. I do love a, I don't know what the specific trope is, but like a found family. I do love that. I love when a bunch of like different outcasts all come together and create a new family. I like that. But the idea of like two vampires getting married and having two vampire babies, I do like vampires in the healthcare system, and you know I do. And Peter is a doctor in this. However, eventually he does cave and drink his patient's blood samples, which, by the way, I almost fell over laughing because he's sitting at his desk. He pulls open the desk drawer and there's 3 blood tubes there. And I'm like, nope, that's not how we treat blood samples. So he like pours it in his mouth. I'm like, nope. So I don't know what kind of doctor he is, but like, why is your blood samples in your desk drawer? My criticism of this movie is not with the actors. I want to be very, very clear. As a matter of fact, the woman who plays the mother, Helen, is actually the physical inspiration for one of my characters in Reese. So when I saw her walk on screen, I was like, I wanted to list it as a vampire crossover, but I can't, because you would only know it if you read Reese, and then I'd have to explain everything. But the actors were phenomenal. I mean, they jumped into this world 1,000% and they gave it their all, and I applaud them for that. I just didn't think that the writing was specifically very interesting. It didn't make me care too much about the characters at all. I was just kind of like, it's fine, it's okay. So that's my review of the Radleys. If I decide to read the book, I will bring it to the podcast, I promise. I want to read Shane Townsend's second book first, and then I'm wrapping up another book right now, and then maybe I'll do Matt Haig's. I'll keep you updated. Follow me on Instagram to hear for sure. Now, next week we are doing one that is very different that I cannot wait to talk to you about. It's called The Vordulac. It is in French. There's subtitles. I highly recommend that you go watch it. I watched it on Prime. Go watch it, come back next week so we can talk about it. And then I'm gonna put a snippet of my vampire panel here at the end of this episode. If you've made it to the end, please let me know in the comments by saying Dracula. I love you guys, but I think I'm gonna wrap this up because it is very windy and I feel like I need to go outside and make sure things are tied down and put away. So I will see you guys next week. I wish you wicked hugs and bloody kisses. Good evening.
And big finish. Thank you.
So, I don't know if anybody knows this, but vampires have been lurking in the shadows of human history since before we could write, since before tales were even painted on walls, okay? In ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Greeks, the Turks, and many other pre-Christian civilizations had stories about creatures who rose from the grave and craved human blood. As civilizations grew and spread, so did the stories. In the interest of time, we're going to skip ahead to 1462. Who knows who this is? Go.
Vlad the Impaler.
Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad II, Vlad the Impaler, and Vlad Dracula, was the ruler of Wallachia. Okay? Stories of his brutality spread far and wide. They were heard way outside of Eastern Europe. Okay? There's a lot of stories about Vlad. The most famous is that he supped on his dinner in a field surrounded by thousands of people on spikes, slowly screaming and dying as they slid down the pikes. That is the most famous tale of Vlad Dracula. Now, I have a podcast episode all about his history, but I'm just going to tell you this. Some of it I think was fabricated, but I think a lot of what he did was to stop the Turks from taking over his little area and was to get some kind of control over the rampant crime in his area. So today, if you go to Romania, people either won't talk about him or they will tell you he was a hero, that he saved Romania. Who knows? But I will tell you this, 400 years later, his stories would inspire this author. Who's this?
Bram Stoker.
Bram Stoker. An Irish author. Shout out to the Irish.
Woo!
In 1897, he published Dracula. And I will tell you, it was not beloved by many. And it wasn't just because it was so gruesome. I'll tell you what it was. It was because 4 out of 5 of his vampires were females. 3 brides and Lucy. And they were aggressive, and they were sexual, and they went after what they wanted. So you can imagine in Victorian England, oh no, we can't have that. So it was very upsetting. People called it unnecessarily grotesque and gruesome. They thought it was going to make the women crazy because God forbid we ask for what we want. So I will tell you this, it changed vampire lore forever. If you talk about vampire lore, you talk about pre-Dracula and post-Dracula, okay? The first adaptation was in 1921. It was a silent film in Hungary, but all signs of it were destroyed because they did not get the rights to do it. Not long after, in Germany, a man would create Nosferatu. He changed just enough to kind of get away with it. But we all know if we watched it, the plot was exactly the same. The Stoker family went through legal battles, and it was dictated that it was supposed to be destroyed. But how many of you have seen it? Exactly. Exactly.